The starship Eclipse Dawn descended slowly through the thick, toxic clouds that blanketed Vexor 7. The planet was a nightmare painted in shades of gray and green, its surface scarred by jagged mountains and endless plains of ash. It wasn't just the environment that made it infamous. It was the prison. Deep within the heart of this desolate world lay one of the most secure facilities in the galaxy, designed to hold the worst criminals ever captured. And yet, there was something unusual about this place. Every guard stationed here was human. Captain Alan Cross stood at the helm of the Eclipse Dawn, staring out at the swirling storm below. His hands gripped the railing tightly as he tried to steady himself against the turbulence. He had read the briefing multiple times during the journey, but none of it fully prepared him for what awaited on the surface. Why humans? That question kept circling in his mind like a moth drawn to a flame. There were plenty of advanced alien, species with superior strength, reflexes, or technology. Yet they weren't trusted with guarding these prisoners, only humans. Beside him, Lieutenant Karen Blake leaned forward slightly, her sharp eyes scanning the instruments on the control panel. She was younger than Alan, but carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her uniform was immaculate despite the long trip. If anyone could handle whatever horrors Vexor 7 held, it was her. Still thinking about it? Karen asked without looking up, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Alan glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the viewport. Yeah, he admitted. It doesn't make sense. Humans aren't stronger, faster, or smarter than most of the other species out there. So why us? Karen shrugged, finally turning to face him. Maybe it's not about being better. Maybe it's about being different. She paused, considering her words carefully. We've always been the underdogs, right? Maybe that's our advantage. Alan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched as the ship broke through the final layer of clouds, revealing the sprawling structure of the prison below. It looked like a fortress carved from black stone, its walls bristling with energy barriers and surveillance towers. Even from this distance, he could see the faint glow of lights flickering inside, casting eerie shadows across the barren landscape. As the Eclipse Dawn touched down on the landing pad, the engines roared one last time before falling silent. Alan straightened his posture and adjusted his jacket. This was it, time to meet their new reality. The hatch opened with a hiss, and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the acrid smell of sulfur. Alan stepped out first, followed closely by Karen. Waiting for them was Warden Harold Finch, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression etched onto his weathered face. He wore a heavy coat that seemed more suited to Earth winters than the oppressive heat of Vexor 7. Behind him stood two armed guards, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. "Welcome to hell," Finch said dryly, extending a hand toward Alan. His grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he wanted to test the newcomer's resolve. "You must be Captain Cross." "That's correct," Alan replied, forcing a polite smile. "And this is Lieutenant Blake." Finch nodded curtly at Karen before gesturing for them to follow him. "Come on. We don't have much time for introductions. You'll learn everything you need to know soon enough." They walked briskly across the landing pad and into the main building. Inside, the air was cooler, though no less oppressive. The walls were lined with reinforced steel panels, and every few meters, security cameras tracked their movements silently. The corridors were eerily quiet except for the rhythmic hum of machinery running somewhere deep underground. "This facility houses some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy," Finch explained as they moved deeper into the complex. "Aliens, who've committed atrocities so unspeakable that even their own kind disown them. They're kept here because nowhere else can contain them." Alan frowned. "What makes this place so special?" Finch stopped abruptly and turned to face him. For a moment he didn't say anything, letting the weight of the silence settle between them. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "Because we're willing to do what others won't. Because we understand the stakes. And because—" He hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. Because humans are immune to certain things. Immune? Karen interjected, raising an eyebrow. To what? Finch shook his head. You'll see. Just remember, one wrong move and you're dead. These prisoners aren't ordinary. They're predators, and they'll exploit any weakness they find. With that cryptic warning, he resumed walking, leaving Alan and Karen to exchange uneasy glances. Immune to what? What weaknesses did these prisoners prey upon? Neither of them dared ask further questions, sensing that Finch wouldn't elaborate. Anyway, their tour continued, taking them past rows of cells sealed behind shimmering energy barriers. The inmates inside ranged from grotesque insectoid creatures to hulking monstrosities covered in scales and spikes. Some sat motionless, staring blankly at the walls while others paced restlessly, their glowing eyes fixed menacingly on the newcomers. A few even lunged at the barriers, snarling and baring razor-sharp teeth. Despite the protective fields, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, studied even. It wasn't paranoia. The intensity of those gazes was almost palpable. These weren't mindless animals locked away for safety. They were intelligent, calculating, and utterly ruthless. By the time they reached the end of the corridor, Alan felt drained, though whether from physical exhaustion or mental strain he couldn't tell. Finch led them into a small briefing room where holographic displays hovered above a circular table. Maps of the facility, prisoner profiles, and operational protocols scrolled across the screens. "This is your command center," Finch said, gesturing to the setup. "Everything you need to know is here. Familiarize yourselves with it quickly. You'll be assigned shifts starting tomorrow." Karen stepped closer to examine one of the displays. "What about the staff quarters?" she asked. "Where will we be staying?" Finch pointed to a door on the far side of the room. "Through there. Your rooms are adjacent to each other for convenience. Don't wander off alone after hours. Stick to the designated areas unless absolutely necessary." Alan nodded absently, still processing everything he'd seen so far. Something about this place felt wrong. Not just the danger posed by the prisoners, but something deeper, more insidious. Like the facility itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Later, that evening, after settling into their quarters, Karen knocked softly on Alan's door. When he opened it, she held up a small notebook. "I found something interesting," she said, stepping inside. She flipped open the notebook and showed him sketches of strange symbols carved into the walls of her room. "These weren't mentioned in the briefing. Do you think they're warnings? Or maybe some kind of code?" Alan studied the drawings carefully, frowning. The symbols looked ancient, almost tribal, but completely unfamiliar. "Could be graffiti left by previous guards," he suggested half-heartedly. But deep down he doubted it. These markings weren't random scribbles, they were deliberate, precise, almost like messages. Karen crossed her arms, her expression troubled. "Whatever they mean, I don't think they're meant for us. More like invitations." Alan didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever awaited them on Vexor 7, it was clear that humanity's role here went beyond mere duty. They were part of something bigger, something darker. And as the night wore on, neither of them noticed the faint whispers drifting through the vents, carrying promises of secrets best left buried. Days turned into weeks, and life on Vexor 7 settled into a grim routine for Alan Cross and Karen Blake. The days were long, filled with patrols, inspections, and endless paperwork. Nights, however, offered no respite. The oppressive atmosphere of the prison seemed to grow heavier after dark, as if the shadows themselves conspired against them. Every sound, the groan of metal beams, the hiss of ventilation systems, the distant hum of energy barriers, felt like a warning. Alan tried to focus on the task at hand, but it wasn't easy. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the prisoners but by something more sinister. The symbols Karen had found in her room haunted him. What did they mean? Who had carved them? And why did they seem to pulse faintly in his mind whenever he thought about them? One evening, during a routine patrol, things took a turn for the worse. Alan and Karen were walking down one of the lower levels, their footsteps echoing off the cold steel walls. The corridor was dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering intermittently. Most of the cells here housed the most dangerous inmates, aliens whose crimes were so horrific that even their own species refused to acknowledge their existence. As they passed cell 312, Karen stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her hand instinctively moving toward the weapon holstered at her side. Alan froze, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, a low, guttural growl emanated from behind the energy barrier. Inside the cell, a massive creature shifted in the darkness. Its body was covered in thick black scales that shimmered faintly under the flickering light. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, fixed intently on Karen. "What's wrong with it?" Alan asked, keeping his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Karen shook her head. "I don't know. But it doesn't look right." Before either of them could react, the creature lunged forward, slamming its bulk against the barrier. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the air, and the lights above flickered violently. Alarms blared, red emergency strobes casting harsh shadows across the corridor. Alan shouted orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but the creature didn't stop. It pressed harder against the barrier, its glowing eyes locked onto Karen. And then it happened. A high-pitched frequency erupted from the creature, so loud and piercing that it felt like needles stabbing into their skulls. Alan staggered back, clutching his ears, but the pain wasn't physical, it was mental. Images flooded his mind, twisted landscapes, burning cities, faces contorted in agony. He dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. Beside him, Karen stumbled, her weapon falling from her grasp. She clutched her head, her lips moving silently as if trying to form words. But unlike Alan, she recovered quickly. Her training kicked in, overriding the chaos in her mind. She reached out, grabbing Alan by the arm and pulling him to his feet. "Stay with me," she shouted over the cacophony. "We can't let it break us." Alan nodded, forcing himself to focus. He drew his weapon, aiming it at the creature. But the moment he pulled the trigger, the energy blast fizzled out before it even left the barrel. His weapon was useless, rendered inert by whatever force the creature was emitting. Karen's weapon suffered the same fate. She cursed under her breath, her frustration evident. But instead of panicking, she stepped forward, planting herself firmly between the creature and Alan. She raised her voice, shouting commands with an authority that cut through the noise. "Back off! Now!" To their astonishment, the creature hesitated. The frequency wavered, then faded entirely. The glowing eyes dimmed and the massive alien retreated slowly into the shadows of its cell. The alarms ceased and the lights stabilized, leaving the corridor eerily quiet once more. Alan leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. What was that?" Karen shook her head, her expression grim. "I don't know, but I think we just figured out why humans are the only ones who can guard this place." They reported the incident to Warden Finch immediately. He listened intently, his face unreadable as they recounted every detail. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. "It's not the first time something like this has happened," he admitted finally. "These prisoners aren't ordinary criminals. They've been exposed to artifacts buried deep within Vexor 7's crust. Artifacts that amplify latent psychic abilities, turning them into weapons of chaos." Alan frowned. "Psychic abilities? You're saying that thing was trying to mess with our minds?" Finch nodded. "Exactly, and it would have succeeded if you hadn't resisted. That's why humans are chosen for this job. Our biology, our primitive, unenhanced brains makes us immune to their powers. Advanced species rely too much on technology and enhancements. Their minds are vulnerable. Ours aren't." Karen crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. "So we're expendable because we're simple?" Finch sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Not expendable. Essential. Humanity's greatest strength is its adaptability. We survive where others fail. We endure, and sometimes survival means facing horrors no one else can. The explanation made sense, but it didn't ease the unease gnawing at Alan's gut. If humans were immune to these psychic attacks, then why had the experience felt so real? Why had those images invaded his mind? Was it truly immunity, or something else? That night, Alan lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded him, chased away by the memory of the creature's glowing eyes and the deafening frequency that had nearly overwhelmed him. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, searching for answers, but the more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Around midnight, he heard a soft knock on his door. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Come in." Karen entered quietly, closing the door behind her. She looked tired, her usual composure replaced by a rare vulnerability. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "No," Alan replied, shaking his head. "Too much on my mind." She glanced at him, her gaze sharp despite her fatigue. "You're thinking about what happened earlier, aren't you?" He nodded. "Yeah. I keep wondering, if we're supposed to be immune, why did it feel like it almost broke me?" Karen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe immunity isn't absolute. Maybe it's just different. Like Finch said, our brains are simpler. Maybe that makes us harder to manipulate directly, but not impossible." Alan frowned. "You think they're still getting to us somehow?" "I don't know," Karen admitted. "But there's something else. Have you noticed how quiet it gets at night? Too quiet. Like the whole facility is holding its breath." Alan hadn't noticed until now, but she was right. Even the hum of machinery seemed muted, as if the building itself was waiting for something. "What do you think it means?" Karen shrugged, standing up. "I'm not sure, but I have a bad feeling about it. Be careful, okay?" After she left, Alan tried to push the conversation out of his mind. But as he drifted off to sleep, the whispers returned. Faint at first, barely audible over the sound of his own breathing. Then louder, clearer, until they filled his dreams with promises of secrets and power. He found himself standing in a vast, shadowy chamber. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath his feet crackled like dried leaves. In the center of the room stood a towering monolith, its surface etched with the same symbols Karen had shown him. They pulsed with an inner light, drawing him closer. Voices echoed around him, overlapping and discordant. "Free us," they whispered. "Unlock the truth." Alan woke with a start, drenched in sweat. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to orient himself. It was just a dream, he told himself. Just a dream. But the memory of those voices lingered, whispering promises he couldn't quite forget. Over the next few days, Alan began noticing subtle changes in the behavior of the other guards. Some seemed distracted, their movements sluggish and unfocused. Others snapped at the slightest provocation, their tempers flaring without warning. Even Warden Finch appeared more withdrawn, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a weary resignation. Karen noticed it too. "Something's wrong," she said one evening as they shared a meal in the mess hall. "People are acting strange, like they're not themselves anymore." Alan nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "I've been having nightmares. Every night it's the same thing, those symbols, that voice." Karen's eyes widened. "You've seen them too, in your dreams?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "Yeah." "Do you think it's connected to what happened with the prisoner?" "I don't know," Karen admitted. "But I think we need to find out. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than us. Bigger than this prison." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices coming from the hallway. They exchanged a glance before heading outside to investigate. A small crowd had gathered near the entrance to Sector D, where the most dangerous inmates were housed. At the center of the commotion stood guard Ethan Cole, his face pale and his hands trembling. "What's going on?" Alan demanded, pushing his way through the crowd. Ethan didn't respond, His eyes were wide, unblinking, as if he were seeing something no one else could. He muttered under his breath, his words barely coherent. They talk to me, they tell me things. Karen stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan, snap out of it. What are you talking about? But Ethan shrugged her off, stumbling backward toward the sealed door of a nearby cell. Before anyone could stop him, he lunged forward, pressing. The aftermath of Ethan Cole's disappearance left the prison in a state of uneasy tension. Guards whispered among themselves, their voices low and fearful, while prisoners watched from behind their energy barriers with unsettling smirks. Sector D, where the incident had occurred, was now sealed off entirely, its access restricted to senior staff only. But even with the added security measures, the sense of dread lingered, like a shadow that refused to lift. Alan Cross sat alone in the dimly lit break room, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His mind replayed the events of the past few days over and over again. The creature's psychic attack, the symbols haunting his dreams, and now Ethan's horrifying demise. Each piece seemed connected, yet the bigger picture remained frustratingly out of reach. He clenched his fists, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. There had to be an explanation. Something they were missing. Karen Blake entered quietly, her boots making soft taps against the metal floor. She carried a data tablet in one hand and a steaming mug in the other. Thought you could use this, she said, setting the mug down in front of him before taking a seat across the table. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the small space, but Alan barely noticed. Thanks, he muttered, though he made no move to touch the drink. Any news on what happened to Ethan? Karen shook her head, her expression grim. Nothing concrete. They're calling it an accident, a malfunction in the barrier system, but we both know better. Alan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, we do. That wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Whatever got into Ethan's head, it wanted him to do that. Karen nodded slowly, tapping her fingers against the edge of the data tablet. I've been looking into the logs from Sector D. Before Ethan went inside, there were anomalies reported. Fluctuations in the energy fields, unusual activity on the surveillance feeds. Someone, or something, was messing with the systems. Alan frowned. You think it's the prisoners, or is it something else? I don't know, Karen admitted. But I think we need to find out. If these artifacts are amplifying their abilities, then maybe they're not just using them for direct attacks. Maybe they're influencing people too. Subtly. Slowly. Alan's stomach tightened at the thought. The whispers in his dreams grew, louder every night, more insistent, promising knowledge and power if he would only listen. Was that what had happened to Ethan? Had he given in to those promises? Before either of them could say more, the door swung open, and Warden Harold Finch stepped inside. His usual stoic demeanor was replaced by visible exhaustion, the lines on his face deeper than ever. He glanced between Alan and Karen, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he suspected they were up to something. I need to talk to you two, Finch said without preamble, pulling out a chair and sitting heavily. There's something you should know. Alan exchanged a quick look with Karen before turning his attention back to Finch. What is it? Finch hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. This isn't the first time someone has disappeared under these circumstances. Over the years, dozens of guards have succumbed to whatever influence the prisoners exert. Some vanish completely, like Ethan. Others change. Change? Karen asked, her brow furrowing. What do you mean? They start acting differently, Finch explained. More aggressive, paranoid, or withdrawn. Eventually, they try to breach containment protocols, often with fatal results. We've always assumed it was the prisoners manipulating them somehow, but we've never been able to prove it. Alan felt a chill run down his spine. So you're saying this place isn't just a prison, it's a testing ground? Finch didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. That's exactly what I'm saying. This facility exists for two reasons. to contain the worst criminals in the galaxy and to study the effects of the artifacts buried beneath Vexor 7. Humans are stationed here because we're immune to their powers. At least that's what we thought. But immunity doesn't mean invulnerability. These things, they worm their way into your mind. They exploit weaknesses you didn't even know you had. Karen crossed her arms, her expression darkening. And you didn't think to tell us any of this sooner? Finch sighed, rubbing his temples. Would it have made a difference? You'd still be here, wouldn't you? Humanity needs this facility. Without it, those artifacts, and the creatures who wield them, would fall into the wrong hands. The consequences would be catastrophic. Alan stared at the warden, anger simmering beneath the surface. So we're just pawns in some larger game? Sacrifices for the greater good? Finch met his gaze steadily. Yes and no. You're soldiers whether you like it or not. Your job is to hold the line, to protect the galaxy from forces it can't comprehend. Is it fair? No, but life rarely is. The weight of Finch's words hung heavy in the air. Alan wanted to argue, to demand answers, but deep down he knew the truth. They were trapped, just like the prisoners they guarded. The difference was that the inmates' cages were physical. Theirs were mental. Later that evening, after Finch had left, Karen turned to Alan, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't trust him. I know, Alan replied, his tone equally quiet. But we don't have much choice right now. Not until we figure out what's really going on. Karen nodded, opening the data tablet and scrolling through its contents. Then let's start digging. If Finch won't give us answers, we'll find them ourselves. For hours, they combed through records, piecing together fragments of information. Maintenance logs revealed unauthorized repairs in Sector D, while personnel files showed patterns of behavior changes among former guards. One name kept appearing repeatedly: Deputy Warden Lisa Monroe. Her signature appeared on numerous reports, detailing strange occurrences, yet her explanations were vague at best. She's hiding something, Karen said, pointing to a particularly suspicious entry. Look at this. She authorized the transfer of materials from deep storage last month. Classified shipments marked experimental. Alan frowned. Experimental? What kind of experiments? That's the thing. I don't know, but I think we should pay her a visit. They decided to confront Monroe the next day during her scheduled rounds. When they found her in the central control room, she was reviewing security footage, her back turned to them. She didn't acknowledge their presence until Alan cleared his throat loudly. Deputy Warden Monroe, he began, stepping closer. We need to ask you about some discrepancies in the records. Monroe turned slowly, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Finch, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through them. Discrepancies, she repeated, her tone neutral. Care to elaborate? Karen held up the data tablet, displaying the flagged entries. These shipments, what are they for? Monroe glanced at the screen briefly before shrugging. Routine, maintenance supplies, nothing out of the ordinary. That's not what the logs say, Karen countered. They're marked classified. Why would routine supplies require secrecy? Monroe's smile faltered for a split second before she regained her composure. Classified doesn't mean sinister. It means sensitive. Some operations require discretion, especially when dealing with the types of prisoners we have here. But these shipments coincide with incidents involving the artifacts, Alan pressed. Like Ethan's disappearance, like the fluctuations in Sector D's systems. Coincidence? Monroe's jaw tightened, and for a moment she looked almost guilty. Then she straightened, her voice firm. I don't appreciate being interrogated, Captain Cross. If you have concerns, take them to Warden Finch. Otherwise, focus on your duties. As she walked away, Alan and Karen exchanged a glance. They hadn't gotten the answers they wanted. But one thing was clear. Monroe was hiding something. That night, unable to sleep, Alan wandered the corridors, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. He wasn't sure where he was going, only that he needed to clear his head. As he passed the entrance to the restricted archives, he paused. The door was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out into the hallway. Curiosity got the better of him. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The room was cluttered with shelves stacked high with dusty files and ancient-looking equipment. In the center of the room stood a holographic display, projecting images of the artifacts, recovered from beneath Vexor 7's surface. Symbols similar to the ones in his dreams danced across the projection, pulsing rhythmically. Alan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. As he reached out to touch the display, a voice startled him. "You shouldn't be here." He spun around to find Lisa Monroe standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Monroe stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost weary. "I could ask you the same question," Alan replied, gesturing to the hologram. "What is all this? What are you hiding?" Monroe hesitated, then sighed deeply. "You want the truth? Fine, but you won't like it." She walked over to the display, deactivating it with a wave of her hand. "The artifacts aren't just tools. They're alive, sentient. They feed on fear, doubt, ambition, anything that weakens the mind, and they're growing stronger. Every day they corrupt another guard, another prisoner, even me." Alan stared at her, stunned. "Why haven't you stopped it?" "Because we can't," Monroe snapped, her composure pure. Alan Cross sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall as if trying to burn a hole through it with sheer willpower. The weight of Lisa Monroe's confession pressed down on him like a physical force. The artifacts were alive. They weren't just relics of some ancient alien civilization. They were sentient beings, feeding off fear and doubt, twisting minds until they broke. And now, humanity's greatest strength, its supposed immunity, felt more like a cruel joke. If even Deputy Warden Monroe was struggling to resist their influence, how long could anyone truly hold out? Karen Blake found him an hour later, slumped in a chair with dark circles under his eyes. She didn't say anything at first, simply sitting, across from him and waiting for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was low and heavy. "She told me everything," Alan said, not looking up. "The artifacts, they're not just tools, they're alive. They're growing stronger every day." Karen nodded slowly, her expression grim. "I figured as much, but what does that mean for us? For the prison?" "It means we're losing," Alan replied bitterly. "Every guard who disappears, every prisoner who escapes, it's not random. It's part of their plan. They're testing us, breaking us down piece by piece." Karen leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Then we fight back. We can't just sit here and let them win." Alan raised an eyebrow. "How? We don't even know what we're fighting against. These things, they're inside our heads. They know our fears, our weaknesses. How do you fight something like that?" "By finding their weakness," Karen shot back. "Everything has one, even these artifacts. If we can figure out how they work, maybe we can stop them." Alan sighed, rubbing his temples. As much as he wanted to believe her, hope felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. Still, he knew she was right. Sitting around wasn't going to change anything. "Okay, where do we start?" Karen pulled out her data tablet, scrolling through files and notes. "We already know the artifacts are buried deep beneath Vexor 7's surface. That's where their power comes from. Maybe if we go deeper into the facility, closer to the source, we'll find something useful. The lower levels are restricted," Alan reminded her. "Finch won't let us anywhere near there without a damn good reason." Karen smirked faintly. "Who says we need his permission?" That night, when the corridors were quiet and most of the staff had retired to their quarters, Alan and Karen slipped away from the main control room. Armed with flashlights and a map of the facility Karen had pieced together from fragmented logs, they made their way toward the lower levels. The air grew colder as they descended, the hum of machinery fading into silence. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps on the metal floors. At the entrance to Level Z, a section marked as off-limits on official maps, they paused. A heavy blast door blocked their path, its surface scarred with warning signs written in multiple languages. Karen examined the locking mechanism, frowning slightly. "This is going to take a minute," she muttered, pulling out a small toolkit. Her fingers moved deftly over the panel, bypassing security protocols one by one. After several tense moments, the door hissed open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. They descended cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The walls were rough-hewn stone rather than the sleek steel of the upper levels, giving the impression that they were entering a natural cavern rather than a man-made structure. Strange markings covered the surfaces, glowing faintly in hues of blue and green. They looked eerily similar to the symbols Alan had seen in his dreams. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the space opened up into a massive chamber. In the center stood a monolith twice the size of a person, its surface pulsing with light. Around it were scattered fragments of other artifacts, each emanating a faint energy field. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. "This, is it?" Karen whispered, her voice barely audible. "This must be the source." Alan stepped closer to the monolith, his flashlight beam reflecting off its smooth surface. The symbols etched into it seemed to shift and writhe, as if alive. He reached out instinctively, drawn by an inexplicable urge to touch it. "Don't!" Karen shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. "Are you crazy? We don't know what it'll do." Alan blinked, snapping out of the trance-like state. "You're right. Sorry, I don't know what came over me." Karen studied him closely, concern flickering in her eyes. "It's affecting you too, isn't it? The whispers, the dreams." He nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, every night. They keep promising me answers, secrets, power. It's like they're trying to tempt me." Karen hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, we stick together. Promise me that." "I promise," Alan said firmly, though doubt lingered in his mind. They began examining the chamber more carefully, searching for clues about the artifact's nature. Karen recorded everything on her tablet, noting patterns in the symbols and fluctuations in the energy fields. Meanwhile, Alan focused on the fragments scattered around the room. One in particular caught his attention, a jagged shard that seemed to hum softly whenever he approached it. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up to the light. Karen frowned, inspecting it closely. "I'm not sure. It looks different from the others. Less refined, almost. Raw." Before she could elaborate, the ground trembled violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. The lights in the chamber flared brightly, bathing the room in an eerie glow. From the shadows emerged a figure, a towering alien creature with elongated limbs and translucent skin that shimmered like liquid glass. Its eyes glowed with the same sickly yellow hue as the prisoner who had attacked them weeks earlier. "You should not be here," it rasped, its voice echoing unnaturally. "Leave now, or suffer." Alan tightened his grip on the shard, stepping protectively in front of Karen. "We're not leaving," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Not until we get answers." The creature tilted its head, studying them with an unsettling intensity. "Answers come at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Karen stepped forward, matching Alan's defiant stance. "We'll pay whatever it takes. Just tell us what you want." The creature's lips curled into what might have been a smile or a sneer. "What I want is freedom. Release me, and I shall share my knowledge with you." Alan shook his head. "No deal. You're staying, right where you are." The creature's demeanor shifted instantly, its glowing eyes narrowing dangerously. "Then you leave me no choice." With a wave of its clawed hand, the chamber erupted into chaos. The artifacts began to vibrate violently, sending shock waves rippling through the air. Symbols on the walls flared to life, casting the room in blinding light. Alan and Karen stumbled backward, shielding their faces as the energy surged around them. "We need to get out of here," Karen shouted, grabbing Alan's arm. But before they could retreat, the shard in Alan's hand began to glow, emitting a pulse of energy that countered the chaos. The artifacts froze mid-vibration, their light dimming slightly. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like a faulty hologram. "What is this?" it snarled, its voice tinged with panic. "How are you doing this?" Alan stared at the shard in disbelief. I don't know. Karen seized the moment, pulling out a portable containment device from her belt. Now, while it's distracted. Together, they activated the device, trapping the creature in a stasis field. The chamber fell silent once more, the oppressive energy dissipating like smoke. Breathing heavily, Alan and Karen exchanged a glance, both shaken but alive. That shard, Karen said finally. It's important. Keep it safe. Alan nodded, slipping the artifact into his pocket. Let's go, before something else shows up. As they climbed back up the stairs, the reality of what they discovered began to sink in. The artifacts were far more dangerous and far more powerful than anyone had realized. But they also held the key to stopping them. For the first time since arriving on Vexor 7, Alan felt a spark of hope. Small, fragile, but undeniable. Back in their quarters, Karen reviewed the data they'd collected, her expression thoughtful. If we can replicate the effect of that shard, maybe we can neutralize the artifact's influence, shut them down for good. It won't be easy, Alan admitted, but it's worth a shot. Karen smiled faintly, exhaustion evident in her eyes. One step at a time. For now, let's focus on surviving tomorrow. As dawn broke over, Vexor 7, the prison remained eerily quiet. But deep within its bowels, the artifacts pulsed faintly, as if biding their time. Whatever battle lay ahead, Alan and Karen knew one thing for certain: humanity's resilience would be tested like never before. The next morning, Alan Cross and Karen Blake met in the control room to review their findings from the previous night. The shard they had retrieved from the underground chamber lay on the table between them, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across their faces. They knew it was powerful, perhaps even the key to stopping the artifacts, but understanding how to harness that power was another matter entirely. Karen tapped furiously at her data tablet, cross-referencing the symbols etched into the shard with those recorded in the prison logs. These markings, she said, pointing to a series of intricate patterns, they match some of the symbols we've seen in Sector D, but there's something different about them. They're older. Alan frowned, leaning closer to examine the shard. Older? What does that mean? It means these aren't just fragments of the artifacts buried here, Karen explained. They might be pieces of something else, something bigger. Before Alan could respond, the door burst open and Deputy Warden Lisa Monroe stormed in, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually sharp eyes clouded with exhaustion. In her hand, she held a crumpled piece of paper. "You two need to see this," she said, her voice trembling as she placed the note on the table. Alan picked it up, scanning the words scrawled in jagged handwriting. "The time has come. Release us or suffer the consequences." "What is this?" Karen asked sharply. "Where did you find it?" Monroe hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to appear behind her. "It was slipped under my office door last night. Someone inside the prison knows what you've been doing, and they're not happy about it." Alan exchanged a glance with Karen. "Do you think it's one of the guards?" "I don't know," Monroe admitted. "But whoever it is, they're working with the prisoners. I've already found 3 breaches in containment protocol since yesterday. If this keeps up, we won't be able to hold them much longer." Karen stood abruptly, her expression hardening. "Then we move now. We can't wait for them to make their next move." Monroe shook her head, her voice tinged with desperation. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the prisoners anymore. It's about the artifacts. They're spreading their influence faster than we can contain. It even Finch." She stopped mid-sentence, biting her lip as if regretting the slip. Alan stepped forward, his tone firm. "What about Finch?" Monroe sighed, sinking into a nearby chair. "He's been acting strange lately, making decisions that don't add up, ordering transfers without explanation. I think he's compromised." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Finch had always been the steady, unshakable leader of the facility, the one person everyone trusted to keep things together. If he was falling under the artifact's sway, then the entire operation was in jeopardy. We need to confront him, Alan said, his jaw tightening. Find out what's going on. No, Karen interjected quickly. If he's compromised, we can't risk tipping him off. We stick to the plan and focus on neutralizing the artifacts. That's our priority. Monroe nodded reluctantly. She's right, but you'll need help. I'll arrange clearance for you to access the artifact storage vault. There are more shards like the one you found. Maybe combining them will give you enough power to shut down the main source. Alan hesitated, distrust lingering in his mind. Why are you helping us? After everything you've done, I'm trying to fix my mistakes, Monroe interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. I let this happen. I thought we could control it, but I was wrong. Now I have to make things right for all of us. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Alan and Karen alone once again. The weight of the situation settled heavily between them, each lost in their own thoughts. Later that day, armed with Monroe's authorization codes, Alan and Karen made their way to the artifact storage vault. Located deep within the facility, it was a high-security area designed to house dangerous relics recovered during excavation missions. The air inside was cold and sterile, the walls lined with reinforced glass cases containing glowing fragments of alien technology. As they entered, Karen activated her tablet, scanning the contents of the vault. There, she said, pointing to a case near the back. Inside was a cluster of shards similar to the one they had retrieved. Each emitted a faint hum, resonating with the energy of the monolith below. Alan approached the case, entering the security code Monroe had provided. The glass slid open with a soft hiss, allowing him to retrieve the shards. As he handled them, he felt a strange warmth spread through his fingers, followed by a surge of clarity. It was as if the artifacts were speaking to him, not with whispers or promises, but with knowledge. They're communicating, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Showing me how they work. Karen watched him closely, concern flickering in her eyes. Be careful, don't let them take control. I'm fine, Alan assured her, though doubt lingered at the edges of his mind. He carefully placed the shards into a containment unit, ensuring they wouldn't react unpredictably. Let's get these back to the lab. If we can combine their energy with the shard we already have, maybe we can create a countermeasure. As they exited the vault, the alarms blared suddenly, red lights flashing throughout the corridor. Over the intercom, Warden Finch's voice boomed, calm but authoritative. Attention all personnel. A breach has been detected in Sector D. All available guards report to containment immediately. Karen grabbed Alan's arm, pulling him toward the nearest stairwell. Forget the lab. We need to stop whatever's happening in Sector D before it spreads. They raced through the facility, dodging panicked guards and prisoners who had somehow broken free of their cells. The chaos was overwhelming, screams and shouts echoing off the walls as energy barriers flickered and died. When they reached Sector D, the scene was apocalyptic. Prisoners roamed freely, their forms distorted by the artifact's influence. Some had fused with shards, their bodies warped into grotesque hybrids of flesh and metal. At the center of the destruction stood Warden Finch, his figure illuminated by the pulsing glow of a massive artifact fragment clutched in his hands. His eyes were wild, unfocused, as if he were no longer in control of himself. Finch, Alan shouted, stepping forward cautiously. Put it down, you don't know what you're doing. Finch turned slowly, his expression blank. It speaks to me, he said, his voice hollow. It shows me truths, promises, power beyond imagining. Karen raised her weapon, aiming it at the warden. Drop it, Finch, now. But Finch only smiled, raising the artifact above his head. A wave of energy surged outward, knocking Alan and Karen off their feet. Guards and prisoners alike collapsed, clutching their heads as the psychic assault overwhelmed them. Alan struggled to rise, fighting against the tide of despair flooding his mind. The shard in the containment unit pulsed brightly, its energy pushing back against the artifact's influence. With a surge of determination, he grabbed the unit and hurled it toward Finch. The impact shattered the containment field, releasing the combined energy of the shards. A blinding light filled the room, drowning out the oppressive darkness. Finch screamed as the artifact in his hands disintegrated, its power neutralized by the opposing force. When the light faded, silence fell over the sector. Guards and prisoners lay unconscious, their minds freed from the artifact's grip. Finch slumped to the ground, his body limp but alive. Karen helped Alan to his feet, both of them breathing heavily. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice shaky. "For now," Alan replied, looking around at the devastation. "But this isn't over. Not yet." As they surveyed the aftermath, the realization sank in. Humanity's resilience had bought them time, but the battle was far from won. Somewhere beneath Vexor 7, the monolith still pulsed with untapped power, waiting for its next move. And when it came, Alan and Karen would have to be ready. The aftermath of the Sector D incident left Vexor 7 in a state of fragile calm. Warden Finch was taken to the medical bay, his body battered but alive, though his mind remained a mystery. Had the artifact's influence been fully purged from him, or was it lurking beneath the surface, waiting for another chance to take hold? No one dared ask, least of all Alan Cross and Karen Blake. They had bigger concerns. With the immediate threat neutralized, the facility's staff worked tirelessly to restore order. Energy barriers were repaired, prisoners returned to their cells, and security protocols tightened. But the victory felt hollow. The artifact's power had been temporarily contained, not destroyed. And deep within the bowels of the prison, the monolith still pulsed with an ominous energy, its presence a constant reminder that the battle was far from over. Alan and Karen spent hours in the lab, analyzing the shards they had retrieved. Their combined energy had proven effective against the artifact fragments, but replicating that effect on a larger scale would require more resources and more risk. Each test brought them closer to understanding how the artifacts operated, but also exposed them to their insidious whispers. Night after night, Alan fought off dreams filled with promises of untold knowledge and power. Karen noticed the toll it was taking on him but said nothing, knowing she couldn't shield him from the truth forever. "We're running out of time," Karen said one evening, breaking the silence as they pored over data logs. "If we don't act soon, the artifacts will recover, and next time, we might not be so lucky." Alan nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know, but what choice do we have? We can't just walk away." Karen hesitated, her expression softening. Maybe we don't have to face this alone. Monroe's been helping us. Maybe others can too." Alan shook his head. "We can't trust anyone else, not completely. Look what happened with Finch. If someone cracks under pressure, it could undo everything we've done." Karen sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Then we'll have to do it ourselves, whatever it takes." That night, Alan lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded him, chased away by the relentless whispers in his mind. The symbols from the shards danced behind his eyelids, glowing brighter with each passing moment. He tried to focus on the sound of his own breathing, grounding himself in the present, but the pull of the artifacts was undeniable. He sat up abruptly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Something wasn't right. The whispers weren't just tempting him, they were guiding him, urging him toward the underground chamber where the monolith awaited. Against his better judgment, Alan grabbed the containment unit holding the shards and slipped out of his room. The corridors were eerily quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by an oppressive stillness. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted his movement. But he pressed on, drawn inexorably, toward the lower levels. When he reached the chamber, the monolith loomed before him, its surface alive with shifting patterns. The symbols glowed brighter as he approached, resonating with the energy of the shards in his hands. For a moment he hesitated, fear gripping his chest. Then he placed the containment unit on the ground and activated it, releasing the shards. The reaction was instantaneous. The artifact's energy surged outward, clashing with the monolith's power in a dazzling display of light and sound. Alan stumbled backward, shielding his eyes as the chamber trembled violently. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and discordant until they became a deafening roar. You cannot destroy me, a voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. It wasn't a single voice, but many, layered together in a cacophony of rage and despair. I am eternal. I am inevitable. Alan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand his ground. Not while I'm still breathing. He reached into the chaos, grabbing one of the shards. Its warmth spread through his body, filling him with a surge of clarity. He raised it high, channeling its energy directly into the monolith. The artifact shuddered, its glow flickering as the opposing forces collided. No! The voices screamed, their tone shifting from anger to desperation. You are mine! You belong to me! But Alan refused to listen. Drawing on every ounce of strength, he drove the shard into the heart of the monolith. A blinding explosion erupted, engulfing the chamber in white-hot light. The ground buckled beneath him, and Alan fell to his knees, clutching the shard tightly, as the world around him dissolved into chaos. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The monolith lay shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor like broken glass. The oppressive energy that had permeated the air was gone, replaced by an almost serene stillness. Alan collapsed onto the cold stone, his body trembling with exhaustion. He didn't know how long he lay there staring at the remnants of the artifact before footsteps echoed through the chamber. Alan! Karen's voice called out, filled with panic. She appeared moments later, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. What did you do? I stopped it, Alan replied weakly, struggling to sit up. It's over. Karen knelt beside him, examining him for injuries. Are you hurt? What happened down here? He shook his head, unable to form coherent words. Instead, he held up the shard, its glow now dim but steady. It's done, he whispered finally. They're gone. In the days that followed, life on Vexor 7 began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could get. Without the artifact's influence, the prisoners became less volatile, their minds freed from the psychic manipulation that had driven them to madness. Guards who had succumbed to the artifact's whispers slowly regained their senses, though some bore scars that would never fully heal. Warden Finch recovered enough to resume his duties, though he resigned shortly afterward, citing burnout and the need for reflection. Deputy Warden Lisa Monroe took over as acting warden, vowing to implement stricter safeguards to prevent such a disaster from happening again. For Alan and Karen, the experience left lasting marks. They had faced horrors beyond comprehension and emerged victorious, but the cost weighed heavily on them. The whispers no longer haunted their dreams, but the memories lingered, reminders of the fragility of humanity's resilience. As they prepared to leave Vexor 7 aboard the Eclipse Dawn, Alan paused at the edge of the landing pad, looking back at the fortress-like structure. Do you think we really stopped it? He asked quietly. Karen stood beside him, her arms crossed against the chill of the toxic wind. For now, yeah, but something tells me this isn't the end. There are probably other artifacts out there waiting to be found. Alan nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Then I guess we'll be ready. Together they boarded the ship, leaving the desolate planet behind. As the Eclipse Dawn ascended through the clouds, neither of them noticed the faint glow emanating from the shard Alan carried in his pocket. Its energy pulsed softly, a whisper of untapped potential, and somewhere, deep beneath Vexor 7's surface, the ruins of the monolith stirred ever so slightly, its destruction incomplete. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over.